Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the January 5th, 2026 board meeting. The current time is 6:31. We do have a quorum at this time, so we'll go ahead and start with introductions. Let's start with, again, those online. Suzanne, I'll have you start us.
Suzanne Beth.
And Laura.
Laura Hartfield.
Okay, and then Jason.
Jason Jones.
Steve Cash.
Trisha Allen.
Ellen Wheeling Waste.
Jess Venable Novak.
Steve Orzak.
Mary Heather.
Wendy Baker. Barbara Wilson.
Jamie McCallum.
And administrators in the room and then online.
Courtney Cron, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Nellie Collazo, Assistant Superintendent of Specialized Services.
Bruce McIntyre, Director of Facilities.
Matt Parenti, Director of Finance and Operations.
And Sonia?
Sonia Apeline, Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practices.
Okay, great, thank you. Next up on our agenda is a motion to adopt the agenda. If I could have a motion, that would be awesome.
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Okay, is there any comments, changes, questions? Seeing none? All in favor of adopting the agenda as warned, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? Okay, the agenda has been approved. Next up is our first public comment period. It's the time on our agenda where we hear from our public and encourage hearing from our public. If there is anyone, there's no one in the room right now. Is there anyone online that would like to make a public comment? Please raise your Zoom hand. Seeing none, it looks like it's pretty much administration. You see Emily there. Okay, so no public comments this evening. Next up on the agenda is a recommendation to approve minutes of our 12/22 board meeting and also our 12/22 board training. If I could have a motion.
I will move to approve the minutes of the December 22nd board training and December 22nd board meeting.
Second.
In a second. Any questions, discussions? Okay, and once again, Mary Heather, thank you for capturing everything in those minutes. Whenever I look at it, I'm just like amazed at the detail. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please, of both the board meeting on the 22nd and the training that happened in the morning, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Next up is approval of our ACSD bills, and I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
No bills. We'll be back next week.
Okay, no bills. That's a fast one. We're moving. Next up, we have a report of the superintendent.
So to begin personnel appointments and resignations, there are two for your review.
Okay. We have two appointments. Can I have a motion?
I will move that we accept the appointments of Daniel Veracruz, custodian 1.0 FTE step 5, effective the 5th, and John Whitney, grounds technician 1.0 FTE step 20, effective also the 5th.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any questions, discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the appointments of, I'll never do this right, Danielle Vercuse, and John Whitney. Please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions?
Yep.
Okay, Laura and Steve Cash, thank you.
I can do the SLP approval if you want.
Yeah, the memo.
I do. So, so on well, let's see, it's in your packet.
Yes.
It looks like it might be kind of 12. You have a presentation relative to a bid approval for virtual speech and language pathology services. And so this is an audit requirement. There's a recommendation that you approve the award for this bid at the bottom of that page to Access Teletherapy for the remainder of the 25-26 school year with a renewal option for FY27. As you can see, we have been through the required bid process, and this is a formality. This is a vendor that we know and has been doing a good job in this arena as well. So that is put forward for your approval.
Can I have a motion?
I move that we approve the award of the bid for virtual SLP services to Access Teletherapy for the remainder of the 25-26 school year with a renewal option for the fiscal year 27.
Okay, a second.
I'll second.
I'll put Suzanne.
Okay. Any discussion, questions? Okay, are we ready for the question? All those in favor of approving the award of bid for virtual SLP services to Access Teletherapy for the remainder of the fiscal 25-26 school year with a renewal option for fiscal year 27, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? Okay, it's been approved.
Thank you.
And anything else under report of,
Concludes the
okay,
superintendent's report.
okay, excellent. Moving right along, we also have a really short report of the chair. In your board packet, I included a draft. We included a draft of the a proposed announcement that would notice that would go into the paper about the ACSD board positions that are up for election. And so that's included in there. We did talk about it at our executive committee briefly and made a couple minor suggested changes where we wouldn't say 5 p.m. on January 26th because some town offices may not be open that late. So we would say end of day. The 26th is the due date, and that you must be 18 years of age in order to submit a petition. Anything else that folks see that jumps?
Can we specify that there's 2 Middlebury seats?
There is 2. Oh, and just say 2 Middlebury seats instead of having them 2 bullets. Yes, we can fix that.
Yep.
Thank you. At one point we had names in and then I took the names out and I didn't consolidate it. It didn't seem like it made sense to put names in there. Jason.
So it says the board's mission is to provide ... Isn't that the district's mission to provide? Or is that really board?
Where are you?
The bottom
Last
paragraph, second sentence.
Yeah, we don't really provide
Yeah,
the learning environments.
we could do that. Would that, if we change that to district,
That makes sense.
is that everyone okay with that? Thank you. Anything else? Hi, Ellie.
Hey, Ellie.
Anything else? So what we'll do then is make the changes, and then we'll get this out in the paper so people have quickly, so that people have an opportunity to meet the January 26th deadline.
Yeah.
Okay, if they're interested. Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have an update from the policy committee. So I'm gonna, some work they've been doing on C30. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason at this time. Jamie.
I'm still
Oh my
Jamie over
God.
here. Last time it was Jason too. But,
Oh my gosh.
that's okay. So we've been talking about C30 for a long time, and I see the 15 minutes allocated for this on the agenda. I imagine it taking less in all honesty, but let's see how it goes. So I just want to give a brief history, very, very brief here, just to bring people up to speed. For the last year and a half, the policy committee in various permutations has been trying to figure out if and how to revise C30, the school residence policy. Most recently, we conducted a survey, as many of you know. We got about 180 responses to that survey, which asked questions about interest in changing schools, interest in changing the way the district assigns folks to schools, interest in school choice, interest in stuff like this. The committee thought more about it, relied on some of that data from the survey, talked amongst ourselves, and it came up with a policy that was trying to solve a problem that we had. And that problem that we are having was an increasing number of requests to go to a different school, for lack of a better word, and that did not fit our current policy. And so after a lot of thinking in the survey, our original permutation of that change was to basically expand the reasons why we would accept or consider someone's school change request to be acceptable. Any of the policy committee members can jump in here if I'm not saying this right. We thought that was going to be great. We wrote a policy. We showed the policy to Pietro. It was not great for Pietro. He didn't like it. He had some strong feelings that our decision had allowed too much subjective decision making into the process that would have allowed or would have burdened the superintendent, is that the right word, with deciding whose choice or request gets affirmed or denied. And so we agreed, and Pietro wrote up some other language that we took into consideration that basically scraps our former idea and instead replaces it with a lottery. So if it took out all the language that would say, if this, then we will approve a change of schools or we'll consider a change of schools. It just says that there are so many seats in so many schools, and at the beginning of the year, we can accommodate so many requests. And if we get more than that number of requests, we will decide those requests by a lottery system. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the general gist. I wanted to give you that summary so you know our progress and process and thinking. And these two documents that are here in the materials, one is our current policy, and then the one below it with some green and red marks is the most recent one that our committee and Pietro's edits have taken into consideration. And so we wanted to bring this to you tonight as soon as we had a version of it to get some thoughts and reflections as we continue revising it. Yes.
I'm just going to add a couple of things that occur to me that we heard feedback through the survey and also just public comment to the policy committee. One was that this might be painting with too broad a brush, so Trisha and Laura and Jamie, let me know. But I think a lot of the input from the survey was, and then I think from parents who attended different open meetings, was a feeling of not necessarily wanting the school assignments to be changed, but being open to more options for parents who, for whatever their reasons, would like to request that their student attend a different school outside of the town where they live. So that was an important distinction to draw in all of this, because the name of the policy is not the school choice policy, it's the school residence or the school assignment policy. And so people were feeling anxious that this was going to reassign people automatically. So that was something that we talked about. We also received input from folks talking about other districts that have managed to do something like this to allow more options and balance that as an equity measure against certain other things that might feel inequitable, namely transportation considerations, which has been a big topic of conversation in the policy committee and then also on the board side, and feeling like, and actually this came through in the survey too, if memory serves, feeling like parents being able, under the circumstances where the district can't provide transportation for whatever reason, those routes just don't exist, that parents who do genuinely want their, or caretakers who want their kiddos to attend that other school will make it work, and that doesn't make it inherently inequitable. But we did try to talk through a lot of around the transportation thing, knowing that's important to everybody. And the other thing that we just most recently talked about, like Jamie said, we had sort of come up with this expanded menu of definitions under which people could petition the central office to request a change. And there's something very simple about what Pietro came back to us with that sort of felt like, oh, well, we've just thrown out a lot of work. But I think clarifies the intention, which is just allowing parents to initiate the conversation with central office, so long as there is space to accommodate that, and it makes sense for all parties that that's best for the kid, that would work, but for a lack of space in which a lottery system would be employed. And that's when it would become more of a randomized process for whose request is approved.
Okay. Either of you have more? Are there questions?
The one last thing I would say is the using the word lottery in conjunction with this. Lottery system is like a hot button topic, and this we are not saying we want to open up a lottery system. This is really you sticks with residents. You are assigned the school based on where you live, and then it's if you request a separate school, that request will be permitted as far as space allows. And it is only if there is more demand than supply that additional level would go in. So this is not inherently a lottery policy. I want to just make that as clear as possible.
There are districts that have everything up to that lottery piece, and my understanding is that they can just sort of accommodate because they have the space in all of their schools to accommodate those requests, and we just don't have that luxury. So that's why I think it makes sense to have that last step as being part of the process potentially. Yeah.
I'll add one thing to that, and that is that Pietro said, who's pretty familiar with the landscape here, and said in all the places he knows where there's a lottery, he could not tell us a single time in which that lottery was used. In other words, that, for reasons being, he claims that the number of requests that districts typically get for this kind of thing is very small. And though I started this whole monologue by saying that we received a lot of requests, my understanding, I don't know the exact number, and that's not information we're privy to necessarily, but the requests would not have been the number of requests that would have triggered the use of a lottery in this circumstance. So the lottery, as Tricia said, has really sometimes kind of freaked some of us out when we first started thinking about it. But in fact, I think is the backstop last measure that we probably would have required to get to anyway in our previous thinking about the policy if there would have been large demand for that, which we don't expect or anticipate.
Questions? Mary Heather.
So I just want to go through the exercise of how it would work. So if families start signing up or making requests to move their kiddos and then capacity is reached, do those initial families get spots before a lottery, or is it you take all requests and then you do a lottery?
Yeah, it's
think
not
the
first come,
second.
first served.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely meant to be a by the dead date. I
Yeah.
can't remember what it is.
And then you look at
We
the
have-
total
How many
number.
requests,
Yeah.
how many seats, yeah.
Operations sets the window.
Yeah.
Steve and then Jess.
All right, looking at the draft policy we have on page 21 in our materials, at the top it starts out with the emergency transfers, and then there's request transfers. I think it would be good to just be specific. Like at the bottom of that page 21, it says the superintendent will annually assess and recommend transfer capacity. I'm assuming that is outside of the emergency. And so just being careful to separate that out. I don't know where we would fall on this exactly, but number 6 for eligibility, I would certainly hope if there's an emergency situation in another district that we might be able to accommodate a transfer there as well. Maybe that's a larger question, but that's
A larger question.
right. Yeah, and I think just making sure we're clear of when we're talking a request transfer, kind of what takes place versus an emergency transfer. And so we don't just say transfer generally down later in the document, being clear about what applies to each pathway.
What happens today if there's an emergency situation and there's a kiddo that's maybe outside our district? Is there any consideration at all at this point? There's no policy, I don't think.
No, I mean, that's typically a conversation between superintendents. You know, a superintendent will call and say, I have this situation. Is there any way in which you might have room for that student? And on rare occasions that can be accommodated, but there are state constraints around that we have to pay attention to. So we would take them all on a case by case basis.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, and Jess, you had your hand up.
My only comment was to say out loud that the number 4, just for the record, the emergency criteria are unchanged.
Correct.
That just wasn't said out loud.
Oh, yes.
So for people listening, so like the process as it stands now has not been touched.
Well,
Someone's got their hand up.
Suzanne.
Suzanne, do you?
Jason also.
Okay. Suzanne?
So I want to thank the policy committee for their work on this. It's great. The only concern I still have is, as we talk equity, that there's no transportation. If some parents want their kids in a different school, maybe because of the number of, they might be males to females, or the behavior issues within a class and just can't move their child because they don't have the transportation abilities. This isn't equitable, which is one thing that we've talked about for a long time. But other than that, there's been a lot of work done here, and I thank you all for it.
Jane, go ahead.
Can I respond to that? I think Suzanne's question is great, or her point is great. Pietro, this transportation sentence in here that says what Suzanne just said reflects Pietro's stuff to us. And I can imagine a world in which we would amend this policy to meet the current D6 policy transportation thing, which says, to the greatest extent possible, the district will allow transportation to families requesting a transfer so long as they exist on existing bus routes, blah, blah, blah. That whole sentence, which goes some distance to saying, we will work with you and to try to figure out if that's feasible, if that's possible. And we did that in D6, and it feels like the spirit of that is, I would assume, would also then be possible in this policy.
Other with Jamie? I'm sorry, Jason. Now what's going on? I'm dyslexic today.
Yeah, I echo the transportation piece. I think we should just, since it's probably going to be a small number of requests, we should just try and provide transportation if we can. And if it's just insanely cost prohibitive, then we reevaluate. But I think,
Right.
I don't know, I would lean towards let's try and provide transportation. But
Okay.
Section 6 about eligibility, it says only resident students are eligible. So who is not eligible?
Non-resident students.
Okay, do we have people from like out of district who are coming to elementary schools?
Yes.
We do. Okay.
Yeah, people
Granville,
who,
Hancock.
yes, so
Okay.
Granville and Hancock, yeah.
So if one of those
They're
families
tuitioned
wanted to petition to be in a different school than they were assigned to, they wouldn't have that ability?
Well, they're not necessary, if I'm just trying to think of a K-5 example. You know, they're coming to a school already, so they can go to a different school already. You know, they're coming in from a town. They're not
choice.
bound by residence already, so it doesn't really apply. If somebody from Hancock, where they don't have an elementary school, wanted to come to Salisbury in kindergarten, the next year they could say, well, we would actually like to go to Middlebury instead of Salisbury. You know, there's nothing preventing them from doing that, you know, in that way. So they're not bound in the same way to the residency pieces that our resident students are in the initial piece. That's why it doesn't apply.
So they wouldn't have to enter a lottery. They wouldn't have to go in that whole thing. They just choose a different school.
Correct.
And they get a spot.
Correct. Yeah.
They don't apply then to any part of this policy.
Correct.
Okay.
And
Last
they're
question
paying
was.
tuition as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
They're paying tuition.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different.
Last question was under section 11, duration and renewal. It says the approved transfer, once transfer is made, the student shall be entitled to remain at the receiving school, occupying an available transfer slot until graduation. So that means that they don't have to stay at the school. They have the option to then give up their transfer spot and return to their school of residence in the town of residence.
Yes, as long as there's room. I would
Okay.
say that's true, as long as there's room, as long as their seat hasn't been filled by others. So their entitlement moves to the new school that they're assigned.
Okay.
And so, you know, if they wanted to go back, you know, then they would be in a good position to go back, but not if it means that, you know, they're, not if their seats have already been filled, you know, by others that are coming in that way, so.
I think that's sort of answered by part 12.
Yes.
I'll say one more thing about this. One thing this policy does also is create or force a greater awareness between the administration and the board on the availability and the, what's the right word, class capacity of our schools and classrooms, because it would require the superintendent to report that stuff. We would approve the available potential transfer slots, all that stuff. So there would be some formal recognition and official public, dealing with that question, which I think also is perhaps important as we've been grappling with like stability and changes to populations and all that stuff.
I'm going to go with Steve and then Jason.
So in the last paragraph, 13, reporting to the board, demographic and equity indicators, you've already indicated that the hope is that this will be a very small list. And if it's a small list, how can we be reporting? Because there's some things we can't report demographically or ethnically because the population is so small, the sample size is so small. So how do you see that working? Because I think this is a very important thing that we need to monitor to begin with, because equity concerns not just the people that have spoken, but me as well. That if we're not watching carefully about the equity indicators, we won't know whether it's being inequitable or whether it's working out that certain demographics are being able to use this and certain are not, when we can't even see the reporting on it. It seems to me like it's the small size school reporting problem all over again. And if, as you're saying, you think this is going to be a very small number, I'm wondering how we're going to get reports on these, especially with demographically and ethnically identifying information.
I don't think anyone said that we are hoping it will be a very small number. What I believe I've heard, and certainly what we've talked about in the policy committee, is that we are hopeful that the numbers will not exceed what is available to the point where lotteries become necessary or routine. I also am curious if the same information privacy rules on student data and student educational outcome data apply to things like numbers of families who have made this request, towns of origin, and where those requests go to. Numbers of students who requested transportation that couldn't be provided if that's the direction we go. I mean, I'm wondering, and Wendy, you're the expert, I guess, on like what would be protected in some of what we might brainstorm could be reported that would help us understand, is this being implemented with as much equity as possible?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't want to violate FERPA rights, in any of our public reporting. I mean, I think there could be some data that we report every other year in a data set of 2 years. For example, if we have some subsets, it just depends, on what we see. So that's something that we would probably figure out together. We would never want to report something that would, allow a student to be identifiable, and so that we would err on that side and to see, much like we do with the VTCAP results, we kind of found a different way to have an important conversation about it. So depending upon what we saw, we would look for those too.
Okay. So I'm going to go with Ron because he hasn't asked a question yet. I think everyone else that has their hand up has. And then I think it was Jason, Steve, and Mary Heather. Is that order okay? Sure. Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks, Barb. I'm just curious if the policy committee ended up discussing the actual attendance areas and whether, having reduced the number of active elementary schools in the district, there was any discussion of whether this policy should include some shift to those attendance areas.
Did it come up in discussion? Yes.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, I was just, to some extent, we are realizing that this may very well be a first step policy, especially with the question marks in the education landscape at the moment and how things are going to be happening. Our current policy as it stands is incorrect. Like, it's just, it needs to be updated, it needs to be changed. So the answer to your question is yes, we have, it has come up, we have talked about it, decided not to pursue that discussion and decision in this iteration of the policy. And let me know if that.
I think to Ron's point specifically, one of the largest reasons why people reported in the survey, for example, that they thought they might want to change schools was like logistics. Mm-hmm. I live closer to this school than this one actually, mm-hmm. or I work here, whatever. And so like, we didn't examine fully the implications of what it would be like redraw boundaries actually. But I think we were fairly concerned about geography in terms of where people live as a reason for why people were curious about this option. But, I imagine some people, correct me if I'm wrong, Wendy, but I think the process will go like this, is that people will likely come to you and say, I would like to do this. And then you would say, why? Right? And then they would say, well, I live closer to this school than this one, or this is more convenient for me, or whatever. And so that conversation then is still a part of this process. This is what I'm remembering us talking about. And then in that sense, I guess to Ron's point, that question, the
Geography.
if geography is an important consideration there, it would be raised there.
I don't know if this is relevant to what you're thinking, Ron, but we also heard from some parents who mentioned moving between towns as just something that's happened in their life, and then their kids being uprooted from a school community that they had been part of, not within that calendar year, that school year, but then sort of, at some point having to leave behind a school that they were invested in, and wanting flexibility, which our current policy doesn't allow for them to say, we moved, but we've been in this school for a year or 3 years, and we'd really like our kid to keep attending that school. So that's not the intended example, but it's one that comes to mind where geography, especially with the housing realities of what we deal with, feel sort of significant.
Okay, so then Jason, Steve, and then Mary Heather.
I have two questions. I forgot, sorry. The survey results, did you guys publish those or make those available? I don't remember seeing them.
We didn't publish them, but we looked at them in public on a screen. And I don't know, whether we sent them around. I don't think we sent a PDF of them around. But it was also included in meeting materials for the policy committee. But I'm happy to share them with people if you want.
That'd be great. I'd love to see those. The other question I had was for Dr. Baker. Given that this new policy would have a little bit more administrative burden, wait lists and lotteries and all that stuff, what is your sense of how much of a burden that would be?
I don't think it would be much of a burden at all. The building principals I've asked them to begin to do some thinking about how they would determine capacity, and sort of what that might look like. That's probably going to shape up to be simpler than, many of us might have otherwise thought, so that part's okay. We'll have to establish a window, and so here's the window, and we'll have to be advertising that. We'll have to make sure that our incoming kindergarten parents are aware of those pieces, after the board approves, the transfer capacity that the administrative team comes up with, and then we'll just have to, everybody will have their 3 ways that they could, make a request to accommodate everybody, including in other languages. And then we'll have a date, I think it's 10 days from the end of the window, that we make sure that everybody's advised of assignments or draw a lottery and to do that there. So I think it's, it's always interesting to figure it out the first year, but I don't see it as particularly burdensome now.
Steve?
Yeah, earlier there was mention of a small school reporting problem, and I think, as much information as we can get in regard to student transfers is good. I do want to point out that doing this work, we will encounter all sorts of small groupings that we cannot share information on. Mm-hmm. I think, yes, that does make this work a little more challenging at times. However, that's part of the rules that guide this work, and that's what we need to do, whether it's a large group or a small group. I don't think that's a problem. I think we need to navigate that. But I would not tie that to small schools. I think there are all sorts of small groupings in different places, and we need to recognize those and work to support them and navigate them as best we can. That's not something I would tie to small schools. And so I just wanted to state that.
Okay. Mary Heather.
Yeah, I just want to sort of clarify on the same question. I guess it would be helpful perhaps to have a sense of how many requests the district does get on a regular basis so that we have an idea of what kind of population we're talking about. Because really the reporting would be for the district, and how many requests we're getting for the district and how many are granted, and then what that looks like, just so that we can verify as a board and as a district that everybody who wants the opportunity is being offered the opportunity and can follow through with that. So can you give us a sense of how many district requests we get for relocation? Is it in the 10s? Is it in the 20s?
Well, I have an N of 1, right, remember? So, so in terms of, I mean, I was transitioning in when this process was kind of going on, you know, in 2024. But I think the, you know, we also had some special circumstances, right, where, you know, we worked with families from Ripton in very deliberate ways, you know, so, you know, but I mean, I guess probably each year we probably field 8 to 10, you know, across the district. Half of those last year probably were granted based on an emergency basis, you know, that would still be part of that, and then that doesn't count some changes that happen through IEP meetings, which would not be part of this process. Right. So, you know, I think that's probably a sense of scope so far. But then again, you know, they're like the policy has not been written in a manner that invites somebody who lives a mile from this school on this side of the town to go over here. So we really are not sure what that might look like as we move forward. Yeah.
So, I mean, just to follow up, it seems like we're kind of at that lower threshold of reporting already. So chances are, you know, if that amount were to go up, the district would be able to report, you know, just general information, nothing that would, you know, expose identity, but just kind of be able to say this is how many requests were made, this is how many were granted. It seems like we would be able to monitor that.
I mean, to that point, I get the impression that this has already been happening, and we don't talk about it. Like families asked to move, and there's, you know, relocation. Some are accepted, some are denied, but we really don't know. And so, you know, in some ways, any increase in the knowing part of it is a step forward of that awareness that our board has of the issue. And I guess is that a fair assessment of that?
I really appreciate
your reporting question.
I appreciate the partnership potentially with the board because, you know, for example, the administrators right now are thinking about, you know, their capacity. If you take the maximum for a class and you subtract 3, right? So that you might have 3 that move in, you know, later. So you subtract 3. Start with that. So if you started with 20 and so 17 is now the kind of the transfer capacity maximum. And how many do you have, you know, and where are you? So, you know, it would be interesting over time to be able to come to the board and say, here's our recommendation. This is what happened last year. Is it okay, for example, that we're only leaving 2 slots, you know, or maybe we need to leave 4 slots, you know, for folks that might move in, so I appreciate the opportunity to be in partnership with the board in the setting of the capacity in each school. I think that's a really important role for the board, and I'm really pleased that the policy stipulates that. And we can handle the rest of it, you know, and we'll report out. And there are lots of things that we can, you know, be asking parents that are non-invasive and also just help us understand if the policy is in service in the way that it's intended to be, you know, so, yeah.
And like, what if the board should adopt a policy, this one or something tweaked, then the next step would be for administration to build a procedure on how to implement it.
Yes.
So,
and I assume you would want to implement that for the 26-27 school year. So we would we would want you to have that go through the second read shortly, so that we could open a window and get communication out and so on and so forth in good stead.
any other, Steve?
Yeah, so it sounds like transfers can happen now somewhat through this old policy process or as part of like IEP meetings, you said. Is there enough of kind of an exemption written into this policy for the other work that needs to be done, like in an IEP meeting, because I'm looking at like 12, and the superintendent may rescind a transfer, but I'm wondering where the administration's empowered in this policy to use those other processes, and I don't really see that.
Well, the IEP process always exists in and of itself, so I think that's, that almost is on a different plane
All right.
from the policy altogether. I think 12 is really related to, if a seat was given to a particular family and the family just chose not to use it, and there was a wait list, then that means that I can, after confirmation, right, or if I'm not hearing anything, I can actually rescind it, reassign them back at their school of residence and reallocate the slot. I think it's just making sure that can be managed well. So I mean, generally speaking, it's really family changes that bring about emergency situations, and that's the time that's used. If there's a student that is struggling in school, we don't automatically assign them to a different school. We don't have a need to do that. And the IEP teams might consider that if for some reason the student can be served in a different school because of perhaps expertise that is in that building and can be served better. And that's a decision in which the parents are partners as part of the IEP team. So that wouldn't be something we would do all by ourselves.
All right, as long as there's a mechanism for that to still take place in light of this, that's my biggest
That
concern.
federal law will still be followed.
Fair.
Did you have another?
No, I mean, I'm sort of contemplating, and I guess I'm just playing around devil's advocate and whether, just making sure that we're looking in our blind spots and whether or not, like, if you had a circumstance where you have a couple of families coming together, their kids are all BFFs, and they all kind of collectively want to move their little group of kids from one place to another, are there circumstances where that would or would not be allowed in this policy structure?
No.
I mean, so those are the sorts of things that I think, board members worry about, that we would just want to make sure that we're,
If people want to move together and you think that's okay, then that's fine. Like, I just think, that I'm appreciative of this policy because I think it empowers families who know their kids best to work with the administration who knows their schools best to make a path forward. And I'm really appreciative of the reporting mechanism, especially as we're moving students to different and new schools, to just kind of have the bird's eye view of where capacity is in different buildings in a way that is appropriate and not into operations. I think this policy hits all of those boxes.
Also, just having read more about equity and school choice, and where it's sort of achieved more equity than sort of the stereotypical or the established historical inequitable outcomes of school choice. But just generally speaking, it seems like controlled school choice is a safer model for that. And I think that's what we're proposing here. And also allowing parents agency is an equitable measure. That is an equity tool. I think sometimes we tend to talk about equity like it's a binary, like it is or it is not. There is one thing or another, and it's a scale. And so I do think that allowing parents to make decisions for their kids or to be in conversation with the district around what would be best for their kiddos is an important equity step for this district, particularly when we are making a lot of decisions around where kids attend school that parents aren't controlling. And so this reestablishes some agency in an important way. And so, yeah, I'm with Jess. I think that, first, I don't think making policy for the worst possible outcome is the best way to make policy, but part of it also has to be recognizing that just assigning everyone to a school based on where they live removes a lot of decision making. And just in reading around equity and this issue, providing more decision making back to families is really important too.
Other questions? Steve?
With the lottery to allocate transfer enrollment, would that be a lottery saying yes or no to that kind of choice, or is it a lottery about kind of which school student could transfer to?
Is it yes or no?
Well, it's actually assigned students and numbers. So if you have, remember, it's only invoked if there are 5 slots in Mary Hogan's grade and there are 8 people who would like to go there. So then the lottery is invoked, and that's the practices that's done through, an Excel random generator, generator or like tool, and each student is assigned a number through that process. And so if there are 5 slots, 1 through 5 are yeses, and 6, 7, and 8 are on a wait list. At that time, I think the process that we would be putting in place is make sure that you have all of your preferences on the front end in the window, like in your ask, right? So if Mary Hogan was a first choice, but you would also feel very comfortable at Salisbury, and you're right, you live in East Middlebury, and you're kind of trying to think about other geographic options, whatever those might be, then you said all that in the beginning. So then if you didn't get the lottery for your first choice, then we would be saying, well, we do have room for you in your second choice. I'm not sure if that was really your question, but I hope.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand kind of when it says lottery, just understand what mechanism, if it's, the yes or no choice, or if it's more geography. I do think kind of the amount of risk that brings into it may keep some larger groupings from taking advantage of this policy, just because there is that risk that you may not get it. And so that may kind of inherently limit some of the interest that we see in it, because some of those people that are interested will not get what they're interested in.
Possibly.
Okay, what's the next step?
The next step is to add in or amend the sentence on transportation that Suzanne and Jason raised, that would say, what did you say, Jason? Actually put it that to the greatest extent possible, we'll try to offer transportation. If the requests are small and they're reasonable and all these things, we'll do our best. That is, so we can edit that. The committee meets tomorrow, special meeting, in case you're forgetting that. And then we will bring a official first read, correct, of a policy on the 12th. And I think it was your suggestion, Wendy, that we warn both the first and second read at the same time, so that the second read has the automatic 10-day.
So that
Can you do that? You can do that. You can warn it as the second read taking place here. You can do that. Whether you wish to do that or not, you have time before the annual meeting to warn this the first time on the 12th, and then a second read on the 9th, I think, is your first meeting in February. So you do have the opportunity to do that if that's what you wish. Or the executive committee could
26 as well.
Could choose to, on the agenda, say that we will warn first and second read both, so that people know that this is taking place. And if it does not pass for first read, then obviously that's going to change. Then your second read is not going to happen when you thought it would. Then you will correct that next time around.
Thank you for that clarification. I have one more question while everyone's here. And Wendy, the current policy C30 is school residence, and the new policy, Pietro changed it to school attendance. And And I'm curious if, to you, it should be school residents? Because I think we have a separate policy on attending school. And I'm just curious if that word is
Or school assignment.
the right word.
Yeah, I think this is not talking about the degree to which we expect kids to attend school. This is talking about which school kids attend. So I think it's okay to leave it this way.
It's okay,
If you'd like, if the policy committee may choose in your meeting to say, school assignment, if you like, it's, I think
Okay.
that's your pleasure.
That's fine. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone so much for your questions and feedback and help. And we'll bring this for another go around on a first read on the 12th.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll put it on the agenda.
All right.
Next up, we have our capital improvement planning. And Jason, do you want to say anything? I have 3 bullet items here. Do you want to kind of stage it at all, or do we just jump into?
Yeah, I think I can just say that the facilities committee met a couple weeks ago and got a first look at, what financing bond for capital improvement might look like, and that pretty quickly, well, it wasn't quick, but definitely sort of made it clear that we just need to discuss this as a full board because the options are relatively limited. And so, in that note, I'm going to introduce Matt, and he's going to walk you through the presentation that's in our materials.
Thank you. So I think, the first order of business for our talk about capital improvements is to figure out what capacity we have to spend money, because there's way more projects that we have identified through the planning process than there are dollars to address them. And I think so making sure that we have a clear understanding of how funding could work, where it could come from, and what the amounts are is step one. And then from there we can look at more of the 5-year layout as a draft. So when we're thinking about financing construction, the first and most important thing is that this is still part of the excess spending calculation. You may have heard in the news that districts around the state with especially dire capital improvement needs have been lobbying to have this part of the district's finances taken out of the spending threshold because they don't want to be judged on it as far as the double taxation goes. That is currently not the case, and as we head into this legislative session, it's still in there. So as of right now, we need to stay under the thresholds to avoid the double tax penalty. Where are we relative to the threshold? Well, the FY27 operating budget that you've seen a draft of and has been proposed so far is at around 96%. Right, so that leaves 4% wiggle room. The threshold does move at the rate of inflation each year. So it was set initially 2 years ago and will be adjusted by the New England specific inflation rate each year. So you can think about three new percentage points each year, give or take. But you also then have to pay for all of the drivers that we talk about every fall. Healthcare, wage growth, other stuff. Right? Everything always costs more. So you've got 4% wiggle room right now. Budget cuts in any area of the spending plan could increase the capacity to bond while keeping costs under the threshold, which is to say the budget right now is a 96% budget. Bringing it down to some percentage less than that would give us more capacity to fund construction. Act 73 is still kind of a wild card in all of this, so we're keeping a close eye on that. Based on what happened last year, we have some idea that this could restrict or remove the local agency over this decision making after around year 2 of a 5-year plan that we're building right now. So there's that window of opportunity consideration when we're thinking about the financial planning. Any questions on those?
Alice?
Yeah, and I don't know who this might be for, and maybe no one in this room. Does anyone know why the state legislature has resisted removing capital improvement financing from it just feels like it disincentivizes any district
that's why.
from
That
making
is
it.
why. It's the
They
intention.
don't want people but they don't pay to fix the buildings either.
I think the concern was that, while the state legislative body is concerned that there are too many buildings across the state, having districts invest dollars in buildings that perhaps from a policy landscape may or may not operate in a period of time, that didn't feel like the right thing to do. So,
but that's currently. I'm thinking like going back to when the state legislature suspended any kind of state investment into school buildings during the Great Recession of 2008.
Yeah.
And since then, a lot has changed, but there's been this double taxation cliff that every district is to some degree or another marching towards or avoiding. And the state has continually not allowed this piece of school financing to be pulled out of that consideration. I mean, so I understand that now because there's this active conversation about, that has momentum around which buildings to invest in. And so again, this is not maybe for anyone in this room. I'm just wondering if anybody knows what the arguments have been over the last decade plus to penalize districts in this way, because it does feel like it's a double tax for deciding that the buildings need to get fixed. And anyway, I'll stop. I just find that so curious. Currently, there's some sense to it, but this is an issue that far predates the last 2 years of conversation about all of these issues. So,
yeah, I think the state sees it as an engine brake on construction to stop while they gain control over the inventory of buildings as they're figuring out how they're going to fund and what will be the next round of any kind of state intervention in the process.
Doing that for 15 years in Vermont is
a long time.
Irresponsible.
I do want to say there's a big difference between using an engine brake on a vehicle and shutting it off.
Right.
So just saying, like how the steering wheel locks.
That's good estimate.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right now, we have 3 ways that we can get money to work on our buildings. So first is the general fund. That's our annual operating budget. We always have a pretty sizable budget that's carved out for the repair, maintenance, and upkeep of our buildings. Within that facilities budget is the capacity to address small repair maintenance tasks that do kind of keep our buildings in good working order. So we don't want to discount the fact that we're already pumping dollars into these buildings in a way that keeps them healthy, keeps them sustained, keeps them safe, and takes care of anything that happens on an emergent basis. So we think of the general fund as where we could see things in the $100,000 to $250,000 order of magnitude, which won't go a long way towards building a new building, but if a boiler breaks or some heating system goes down, well, that's insurance. That's a different thing. But you're picking up what I'm putting down. Insurance could be on here as a fourth, but we don't want to think about emergency insurance claims. I put that it could offset repair and maintenance costs because sometimes if you are going to spend $10,000 fixing a door, spending $40,000 on a new door would be an offset, right? So you're only net 30 on the cost of that. Within the general fund, each $100,000 project is about 3% of ed spending. So remember, we're at 96. We got 4% to work. Within capital reserves, we have about $5.1 million of reserve funds. A lot of that was put in during the COVID years, where between some large grants and small operating costs, the district generated a pretty healthy surplus. there is a 5-year statute of limitations on these funds, and so we try to keep tabs on when the money went in so that we make sure we spend it before its due date. The next due date is coming up in FY28, and we have $271,000 left that went in FY23. We think of capital reserves as able to address projects in the $250 to $5 million order of magnitude, and again, that's a big range. It really depends on the nature of the use. 250 to 250,000 to $1 million could be, something small like cameras and doors that touches a lot of different buildings. 5 million might be one, sort of kitchen renovation at the high school, or sort of a marquee project of that magnitude. And finally, we have our ability to go out and ask the public for a bond. We need to determine what our bonding capacity is, and so when we think about that 4%, what the amount is that 4% equals, it's about $1.5 million, give or take, in debt service that would push us right up to the threshold. $1.5 million can be the financing payment on debt service for either a short-term or a longer-term bond based on what kind of principal and interest program we put together. We'll see some more detail on the next slides, but $15 to $25 million and two different payback periods is kind of the range that we've determined that amount of spending capacity would put us into. As a disclaimer, this amount does not take into account the additional budget drivers that we've talked about, and I won't go through those again, but you can only spend the same dollar once. So important to keep that in the back of your mind. When we think of bonds, you can choose the amount of money that you're asking for, and you can choose the length of payback, just like financing anything. So we've got two kind of different styles of bond, a sprint versus a marathon. Sprint would be a shorter period of payback. That's generally a larger payment, sort of a more aggressive style of getting something paid off. Another benefit of a sprint bond is that you can sometimes stack different ones. You might not use all of your capacity up at once, or you might start to trail off your payments sooner, so you can bring another one in sooner and sort of cycle through small projects on a quicker cadence versus being locked into a longer term investment. The weaknesses of a sprint would be that you can't access as much money in one go, and that could block you from being able to tackle major construction projects. When it comes to some of the risks, in a sprint, you risk interest rates spiking, right? So if you do a 5 or 10 year bond and get a really good rate, and then 5 or 10 years later, rates are way higher, and your plan is to start cycling a new one in, you could wind up with a higher interest rate. Of course, the same is true in reverse for a marathon bond, where you could get locked in to something higher and then have rates bottom out and not be able to refinance if you were in a marathon. So longer term commitment and more overall expense, as we'll see here for a longer bond. Harder to stack or layers, kind of like locked in once you've made that decision. Regardless of the bond length and the amount, we still have that same $1.5 million ballpark of new debt. So it doesn't really matter which one you choose. We'd have to set it up to be the same kind of payment structure. So here's a table that looks at two different factors: the amount that you would be bonding for, and then the period that you'd be paying it back. The longer you pay it back, the smaller the annual payment is. If you use some shading here to look at things that are in the green, meaning they're kind of in that under $1 million per year range, and this is a 4% interest rate for everything tonight. Yellow is sort of in the range of acceptability. Orange, we're looking at kind of a stretch and the need to maybe do some programmatic trimming just to kind of fit that level of debt service in. And then red is, sort of a payment that would exceed our current capacity to pay that within our operating budget. So that's the color coding there, and you can kind of see that band moves through the middle. The longer you spread the costs out, the smaller the payments get. However, you are paying interest each year, and so worth considering what the total cost of the bond is over the life. So for here, we've looked at the total principal plus interest, and you can see, a $5 million bond costs $6.1 million for a 10-year payment, and it costs $8.6 million for 30 years. $25 million bond almost doubles in cost over the long 30-year period. So there's no such thing as free money. It's going to be earning interest the whole time, and that total cost is being kind of pushed down the road towards a different operating year to reckon with. It doesn't go away. So those are sort of the secondary considerations, but I think an important part of deciding what strategy makes the most sense. And that is all we have to say about that.
Ellen.
Is there a reason, Matt, that you showed us this table ending at 25 million as an example? And I'm just wondering, because the numbers we've gotten from various capital improvement plans far exceed that, even on the low end. So
yeah. It
I'm
definitely
doing
dovetails
math,
with some of the 5-year planning that we're going to look at later, which doesn't suggest anything greater than that magnitude.
Got it.
Within the next 5-year period. So
it's also sensitive to where you are with the spending threshold. So it's understanding that it is a priority of the board and likely the communities that we're respectful of that unless something changes in the legislature. 25 million at 30 years is probably like that's what you could afford, and still we can still try and stay under it, right? So
yeah, you go back to the available funds slide, there's 2 bullets at the bottom of that, and I know being on the facilities committee, that top bullet I think kind of lays it out most clearly at 15 million in the short term or the 25 million in long term. As far as that debt servicing.
But just to clarify, in theory, we could also decide we wanted to pay more annual debt service, and then those numbers would go up, just hypothetically.
They could, but then there would have a ripple effect that our taxpayers would be paying a lot more tax, and for the portion that goes above our spending threshold, it'll be double taxation. So there's a big penalty there for doing that.
Or making big cuts to our current budget.
Exactly.
Thank you.
This is kind of like the warning light threshold. Alarms go off. We don't want to exceed that.
check engine light.
Yeah. So this is the breathing room we have. We can afford about 1.5 million in annual debt service, and that still puts us right up against the threshold and does not include other drivers that also move us toward the threshold. So that's really all we can afford.
In a rate that's greater than inflation.
It doesn't include the other drivers?
Correct.
So you will have, healthcare is moving at a rate that's greater than inflation, right? There are drivers that you have that are rising at rates that are greater than inflation. So in order to accommodate that as we build future budgets, we would have to take from expenditures that are already in place in order to keep us underneath the threshold, because if you add a $1.5 million payment in there, that's fixed. We can't do anything about that. We have no flexibility in that. So that means that if we have to cut to accommodate drivers that are rising faster than the rate of inflation, which is the way that the spending threshold goes up, then we would have to take it from programmatic pieces, otherwise, because we could not obviously change our fixed debt payment.
Jamie?
And then it looks like Suzanne.
Okay, Jamie had his hand and then Suzanne.
Perhaps I'm just connecting dots that shouldn't be here, but on the first slide, the Act 73 piece about agency after 2 year of the 5-year capital improvement, that whole thing that we were talking about earlier, is there a way in which that possibility like incentivizes a sprint bond as opposed to a marathon bond?
I think that it's pretty well understood that there will be outstanding debt service across the state when any kind of redistricting action occurs. And so, different districts will be in different states
Different
of
places
repayment.
yeah, okay.
I don't think that means that incentivizes one or the other.
Okay.
You could say two districts are being merged. This one happens to have 25 years left on a 30-year bond. This one happens to have 7 years left on a 10-year bond. This one happens to have 1 year left. Because everyone's going to have their own history. We still have debt service very small right now. It's $150,000 a year on things that I think are 2032 maybe finish up. So we're not paying very much annually, but that's part of our story. What we would be bringing in.
Right.
The other side of that is that each district has their own reserves, capital reserves, educational reserves, and those surpluses would be merged as well. So there's part of both of those things would happen.
Okay.
And there's no prenup agreement.
There's no prenup agreement. There you go.
Right, yeah.
For these kind of situations.
Suzanne.
Right.
So Matt, 2 questions. One, to stay under the threshold, this is just based on current year's thresholds and budget drivers, correct? It's not even taking into the fact that next year we may have fewer students and therefore our threshold could be higher or lower?
Correct.
Is that correct?
A tick down in LTWADM could raise the per pupil cost and tighten the threshold.
Okay. So the other question I have is, I know that this plan is required by the state of Vermont, and so it's an exercise that we're going through. But when, or maybe we don't, when do we ask the communities what their thoughts are and how much they would be willing to spend towards this? I've been hearing from people on the street that they've already decided, for one reason or another, that we're already going out for a bond vote. We're pretty, in my mind, we're quite a ways away from it, but that's not necessarily what everyone else thinks. So I'm wondering, is there a plan in place to have a conversation with the general public and ask them, about this? Or is it just we're going through the required exercise by the state and then we'll see where it falls after the legislative process happens this spring?
I think that's part of what I imagine you'll discuss,
Right.
Just in terms of where is the work and what do you see as important moving ahead, and what is it that you'd like to do. You can always amend a plan to the AOE. You're saying, something that you submit is like, here's some thinking about what we might do and our approach. This is our, and we're going to reserve the right to obviously amend that after we get, further information, so on and so forth. You don't have to have everybody in agreement before you submit a plan. It can be an outline of where you are intending to go. That's up to you. The degree to which you want to engage in larger conversations, and you'll probably see as we move forward a little bit more as to what the scope of all that looks like. Yeah.
And it seems to me that if we look at the agenda, some of that discussion would be, come up under item 3, right? Based on, as far as what's the facilities committee thinking of priorities, or how do we come up with the priorities for the amount we think we might be able to spend? And then maybe when we had something like that, it would be a really good time then to engage community as well, but not at this 1,000-foot level where we haven't done that yet. Any other on this section? Obviously, this is broken down into kind of 3 different agenda items. So before we entertain the next subsection, any other questions that we have? And then, of course, we'll be coming back and we'll be having further discussions. Are we good?
I can explain the rest of the evening. Jason, pipe in if I forget something. But I think the facilities committee, in their retreat, we sort of talked through different options and priorities, and obviously, work that ensures the safety and security of kids rises to everybody's priority, right? And so there's some of that work that is related to year 1 of a proposed plan that falls under the executive session privileges, because we don't necessarily want to be discussing that as a whole, and we have some very specific items that relate to that. So that's the purpose of the executive session, so that we can share with you openly the things that relate to upgrades and repairs that are in that area, that we want to draw to your attention as a potential year 1 expense. Once we have done that, for your information, we won't be expecting you to take action on that tonight. That's just for your information. Then in public session, the remainder of the discussion will take place, and we'll simply refer to, security expenditures that we are discussing in executive session. Does anybody have questions about that? I know that's kind of an odd use of an executive session from the things that you normally do, but okay. So as our requirement is, we have to do 2 motions. And so let's talk logistics, because we have a virtual meeting going on right now. So what's going to happen is we will actually have to leave this, and I've made sure that the time for the webinar is until 9:30, so please, we should be back before then, so that we don't lose the original link, so we can come back on it, because we do have folks that are remote, so we can only use one webinar link at a time. So we'll have to leave the current, once we go into motion, to do the motions, right? And then I did email out the meeting link, and I think, Jason, you have it, that you can bring it up, so that those that are remote, we can come in on this other meeting, so that it's secure and private with the board, and then we'll have our discussion, and then we'll leave executive session and come back and get on the main webinar link again. Does that all make sense? Okay. Great. So, but before we do that, we need to do the motions to go into executive session. So, Jason.
Before we jump into that, I think you gave a great rundown on the digital
Yep.
side, but for members of the public.
Yes,
in the room,
members of the public will have to leave
And then
and come
if
back.
they choose, they can come
thank
back.
you.
Right.
Thank you.
So are we inviting members of the administration into executive session with us?
Pardon?
Are we inviting members of the administration into executive session with us?
I think that's up to us. Obviously, we can definitely do that. That's up to the board.
I think there's,
Is there a reason, should we?
well, I think Matt, Bruce, and Dr. Baker should probably be involved.
Yeah.
We think so,
yes. It'd be kind of hard for us to do this. Yeah. So when we go into executive session, we can invite them to participate. That would be a good way to handle that.
So I move to find that public disclosure of district security, cybersecurity, or emergency response measures could jeopardize public safety.
Okay, can we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, let's just, all those in favor, with the statement that this would jeopardize what did you say? Say that again.
Disclosure of security, cybersecurity, and emergency response measures could jeopardize public safety.
Yes, what he said. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 And any opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none. Okay, now we can move to the second.
Just need to clear out, I guess.
Yeah, sorry. We'd kick you out before we started discussion.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I move to enter executive session per VSA 313A10, cybersecurity and emergency response measures.
Can I have a second?
And may I amend that, Jason, and say to include that we'd like to invite Dr. Baker and Bruce McIntyre to that meeting?
And Nellie, I think.
Oh, and Matt Corrente?
And Nellie.
Second.
Second all that?
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of going into executive session per VSA 313A10, which is security, cybersecurity, or emergency response measures, and inviting in Dr. Baker, Matt, Bruce, and Nellie, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Okay.
Recording in progress.
So now we have our school-based capital improvement discussions, and I put Jason and Matt, your names here, kind of as the lead for those discussions. I mean, I will still be happy to call on people, that kind of thing.
And I can go watch the game.
So did everyone get the handouts? Jamie, do you
I think how are they sorted?
Just,
I'll share it on the screen.
Take two. Okay.
Okay, you guys-
Pass the baby.
Oh my gosh.
You shared that with Suzanne and Laura.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it up on the screen here.
There's absolutely nothing confidential about this handout. It was just making sure that we had as accurate as information as we could, given the holidays and all of that communication, so that we're bringing something tonight. That's why it comes out tonight instead of in your board packet. So when the facilities committee met, you know, we obviously had an enviable task. Matt led us through what he led everybody through, right? And we went, oh, that's interesting. So we had the unenviable task of trying to figure out how to approach this, and I could say maybe that there are a couple of approaches that we took in preparation for that on the administrative end. You know, we went through each of our 7 schools that you see across the top, and you know, we identified that, okay, there are certain some characteristics of some of them that were important. I think, you know, generally speaking, from the administrative standpoint, you know, Cornwall just needs a lot more analysis and discussion. We really weren't even in a position to be able to say, well, here's what we think should happen or rise to the priority in Cornwall yet. You know, the initial process B had a 20,000 foot kind of cost estimation, and it's like, obviously we need to be thinking about that more. We need to develop a shared understanding with the community about kind of where we are, and so that doesn't have specific recommendations, not for lack of wishing to do something, but because there's a lot more analysis that we felt we needed in order to be able to understand how to undertake that project. Weybridge and Salisbury did not come up as needing specific capital investments. And all of the schools we looked at with their current enrollment. So we did not look at them, even though in the modeling, you know, we went through a process to determine what would current state be and what might an alternate state be. In working up this initial thinking prompt, we looked at current enrollment needs, you know, for each of the schools. So that's why Weybridge and Salisbury don't particularly have current enrollment capital needs that are, you know, different from what might show up currently through our operating budget. So that's why you don't see anything there. The security upgrades and repairs that you see across the top, you know, those are the things that we're discussing in a confidential manner. And then you can see that there are 2 other security projects that are discussed in year 2 and in year 3, which is indicative of, I guess, our conversation focusing on the need to ensure we're attending to those things as a high priority if the district is thinking about allocating investment resources. So mums, I guess, is the only other thing I would say. You know, one of the things that's really important about mums is that we identify what the enrollment projection looks like and how does that impact their design and their configuration. So, initial enrollments, if we look at the current students that we know over the next 5 years, because we have them already, the classes are getting smaller, as we know, right? The classes are getting smaller with the younger kids. So what we want to do here before we are ready to talk about what we might recommend, to the extent that that's helpful, is really reviewing some of those things with the mom's team and getting a sense of how they see that and how they see that impacting the building and the number of students and the density in the building. So that's the next step around that. That's why it's in the more information needed category. And I think that's really it for sort of overarching thoughts. Am I forgetting anything, Jason, or is there anything you want to add about?
I have a question. So in this case, obviously the Shorn building is pre-K.
Yeah.
So, and I know that we did identify some improvements for the pre-K, to reconfigure it, that kind of thing. It's still one of our buildings, right? So the fact that it's not on here, is that?
Well, it already has an up-to-date camera system.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't need anything. It doesn't.
Right.
I think that's just a table error. So
Okay.
it should be in the last column, and it doesn't need any security updates.
It might be good to just include it on there.
Yeah.
Just for completeness.
Yes.
As I recall, there was an improvement, a security improvement, actually.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I said security improvement, I meant capital improvement.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It doesn't need, so it fits into the Weybridge Salisbury category.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just kind of treat it like that.
Yeah.
We have the
Apologies.
security being blank as well.
Yep.
That would be awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
We don't usually print things out, so.
I know.
It's not in that way. Yeah, fit to paper.
Thoughts, questions? Steve?
Is this in preparation for some sort of vote, or is this simply for information?
It's for discussion.
For discussion, okay.
Right.
Okay.
And it's like, where do we, right, Jason, it's like, where do we go from here? And this is assuming I'm assuming this is like a 15 million bond.
I'd let Matt speak to that.
Yeah, so on the second page, we kind of tried to show corresponding expenses. Of course, for the security upgrades and repairs, just use a simple prorater, so that's not specific to any actual amounts. It's just an estimate. Year one and year two would both be financed through existing capital reserves in this plan. So that $1.7 million year two investment report and the total of all of the year one investments across all of the buildings. In year three, you can see that $15 million bond that would be used to fund the entry and HVAC projects at the high school. That was initially drafted as a 10-year repayment period, so through FY39. At 10 years, that kind of fits into the existing capacity. You could spread it out to gain capacity. Funding for year four, $5 million for Mary Hogan's C Wing has not been determined in this plan because it would be reliant on what kind of bonding capacity existed at that time. Knowing that we've used a lot of bonding capacity in the previous year, you might wind up looking more towards the reserves, cash on hand, as a financing strategy there, or thinking of those two as a combination 20 and financing accordingly. Over the 5-year plan, you can see that sum down in the bottom of about $22.25 million invested in the buildings.
Matt, I'm sorry, just, I don't think our online participants have the materials that we're discussing, so I just want to make sure that they.
That is correct, Mary Heather. We don't have them in email, and it's really hard to follow along with what Matt's doing. Sorry.
Can you send them, Matt? Well,
Can you share the access?
just send them along, yeah.
Ellen?
This might be retreading what we had talked about earlier in the evening, but I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about this correctly because I think I'm not. So I just want to confirm. Our ability to afford the bond payments, or the chart that Matt showed us with the table leading up to $25 million over 30 years, that doesn't take into account double-digit increases in healthcare prices or any number of other things that we have been experiencing from a budget standpoint. And Wendy, you said that in order for us to, assuming those costs continue to rise as they have for the last several years, without some kind of extraordinary, unpredictable intervention, which I don't think any of us should expect or plan for, if we were to adopt a bond to afford $22.3 million, we would be also making a decision, I think, inherently to cut programming to afford these improvements. Is that correct?
You'd have to cut something. So, you know, I mean, whether that's programming, whether that's infrastructure, I mean, you would have to reduce your expenditures in some way from some of the blocks, right? So you would have to be reducing from your blocks.
But what we've seen from reducing infrastructure so far is pretty minimal in cost savings that also can get eaten up pretty quickly by rapidly rising out of our control costs. So
you would have to do that over multiple years, I think. Yeah.
Right. So I just want to be really clear that any movement in the direction of these improvements is inherently a movement in the direction of making some pretty significant cuts in our budget as it stands today in order to afford these improvements.
Relative to a bond.
Relative to a bond,
yes.
Without tripping the wire on the taxation, the double taxation.
Knowing that the threshold will also move at the rate of inflation. So the budget can grow at the rate of inflation before the margin starts shrinking. If enrollment is held constant and weight is held constant.
Right, though all those factors, but even just to do the math a little bit, which I sort of was back of the napkin doing, the rate of I mean, within a few years we're hitting that threshold, even without adding bond payments to it. So,
potential.
Yeah, okay.
And, you know, the way that education is proposed to be funded is through the foundation formula, right? And one of the things that was not addressed at all was capital spending in the last legislative session, and in terms of, you know, how is that determined? There wasn't an extra that you got that related to your bond payment. So that is a complete unknown if we are to transition from what we have now to a foundation formula.
I will jump in and say that I don't want to. I think it's maybe a little too simplistic to say that like doing any capital improvements or bonding for capital improvements means we're setting ourselves up for cuts. These are very high level numbers, right? So yes. $15 million to redo the entryway and put in this, you know, secure entryway at the high school. That's a really high level number.
And the HVAC.
And the HVAC, yeah. So we could decide to say, like, you know what, we're not going to spend $15 million on that. You know, let's go back to a designer, architect, and say, like, you know, what can we get for $10 million? Because that's what we're going to do, and we're going to scale it back a little bit, or whatever it is, and get a little more concrete numbers. That's something we can do. So I don't want you to look at this and be like, oh, we can't do anything. Like,
right.
Throw your hands up. Like, we can. We have options, and we can look at different things. These are just real high level numbers at this point. So we know like what we're talking about.
So I have a question. with our capital reserves, obviously, we've moved money into that, right? And we have like 5.1 million roughly there. We're not moving anything this year, correct?
Unless you authorize us to move something in advance of the year one expense, otherwise we're not taking it.
Yeah.
Not moving anything out, not
Moving anything in.
Right, exactly. So it's like 5 mil. And
right.
in the past, since I've been on the board, it seems as though we've always had a nice little surplus that we've been able to then move into capital reserves. That's given us that 5 million, correct? And I'm not seeing that as much anymore, where our budgets are much leaner and tighter, and if we go to a foundation formula, even more so potentially, is the concern. I mean, the good news is here, the first couple things here, it's like, yes, we can deal with security improvements, we can deal with the entry for Bridport, right? Within the reserves that we have, and there's potentially some room for some additional work there because it's 5 million, but it's not like that. It's in 2 years that's going to be 7 million, or we'll be replenishing the money that we took out of it.
Our auditor also recommends holding an $11 million reserve across all reserves because that represents 3 months of operating costs.
Right. Wow. And are we even close to that?
No. Our reserve position is below what would be considered a healthy reserve position.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we still are obligated to that 5-year statute of limitations.
Yes. So otherwise you lose it.
Right? And like I said, I think there was a $2.3 million designation that ties to 20 or 20, maybe 22. At any rate, like some big years from COVID, right? And so,
right.
Like a lot of money being pumped into the schools. Those days are gone, right?
Yep.
I think AOE has come out and globally said it that way. Okay.
Right.
$2 million fund balances are a thing of the past. Historically speaking, I think we've seen it go as low as 0. We have an extenuating circumstance for FY25
right.
on our bottom line. But yeah, as Dr. Baker said, the margin of surplus is certainly tightening.
It's also unclear what will happen to our capital reserves if our district changes, right? So,
I might want to spend them.
Well, I'm not sure how best to navigate that, but I can say to you that it's certainly unknown at this point, so.
I have one really high level question just to make sure I'm understanding everything. So the 5-year capital improvement plan, we need to approve a plan for the AOE
Correct.
No matter what,
Correct.
regardless of the bond.
Yes.
So that's what this is, or a version of this.
Correct.
Right? And then there's the question of what we would maybe move forward with in a bond.
The plan is a map too, it doesn't obligate.
Right, you can change it. Okay.
And to Jason's point, any of these things that you do that that are here, it's like, well, here's the intent, but there's a lot more detailed analysis that goes into expending any of this, so that we're far more dialed in than we are here. Which, I mean, we have reasonable information that helps understand what scope is what, I think, but we would want obviously much more detailed information before leading to any expenditure.
And is the idea, because you said year 1 and 2 expenses would come from capital reserves potentially, so the next thing would be year 3, and then at that point, if Act 73 is as it stands, we don't have control over that anyway, because we're past the 2-year mark of having control over your capital improvements.
Correct.
Yep.
Just want to make sure I was understanding that. No
Very
real
good.
question. Yeah.
Ellen.
What is the purpose of So I'm actually really glad, Jess, that you asked that question, because I was definitely reading this as like what we might seek to put a bond out for, what we might seek to actually accomplish, which, that's how I'm reading this now. But what's the purpose of this being what we submit to the AOE and not something more along the lines, or that's more inclusive of some of the maybe less bare bones renovations or upgrades that we have talked about over the last few months, as like a real assessment of what our infrastructure needs? This feels like an unfortunately realistic, potentially plan, and even then it makes me pretty nervous. But I'm curious, like, why not give the AOE a more straight read on what our buildings as they exist currently need? I'm just wondering why not give them the full?
You might do that, and you might turn what you've learned into an advocacy position, for that matter. I mean, in many ways. I mean, I think there's nothing to say that in a report we can't put all of the presentations together as appendices, and and all of that, so that they're understanding the information that you're sifting through. I think this really is more of a roadmap as to, okay, these are the capital expenditures that we see needing to happen, which, in the best of all worlds, informs Bruce, what's the name of the committee now? That's a capital. The group that has no money.
Task force.
Yeah, but they're getting together to say how money will be allocated when there might be money.
Oh, wow.
Right, so that we're saying, okay, here is the money that we see ourselves needing imminently, potentially, and then here are the things that we might see ourselves needing, beyond that. So.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, the delta between what feels realistically necessary in this, I think, is still significant. Even accounting for schools that have smaller populations that might be under consideration for X, Y, or Z. Mary Hogan, presumably under any number of scenarios, would have a lot more students in the building, and this accommodates that not at all.
Right.
And potentially MUHS becomes a regional high school if we move in, and this accommodates that not at all. So there's so much here that feels like, even if, again, we don't want to get wild with the hypothetical situations, but if I do think there's some advocacy for us to do as a district about the harsh realities, and we're not alone in this at all, that districts have been put in, the rock and a hard place position that we're in, of having very limited opportunity to invest in our buildings without these disincentives that lead to higher taxation for our constituents and our residents. And at the same time, the buildings need so much work. So this feels like real bottom dollar bare minimum stuff. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying, I would be interested in putting out to the AOE a capital improvement plan that represents something more representative of the vast needs of the buildings that we've been hearing about since August.
Steve. Yeah, and I guess being on the facilities committee, and keep in mind also the backdrop that we have one school that doesn't have students in it this year within our district already. We have another school next year that we are going to be sending the elementary school kids from that town to another school. And we have already done that work. So I would characterize it as a rock and a harder place.
Yeah.
And I suspect the harder place will keep getting harder, is what I fear. And so we have done some of that work. On the facilities committee, my take on it was we could kind of take this so far. We got the very high architect view. We understood from Matt our budgeting capacity. And then on mums, we did hear from an architect that there are too many, or not too many necessarily, but that school is full. And what is going to be our solution to that? We don't know. Sounds like changes in enrollment may be part of that going forward. And then Cornwall, I think we do need to have more conversations about what we do there as well. And so this is kind of, I think, that space in between. The security
conversations we've had, I think were top of mind for a lot of us and wanted to get through those. But yeah, I don't really know how we capture kind of what you're talking about in a way that isn't so bare bones, just based on the realities.
What if we, in the plan, and this may, if Bruce is okay to say to go crazy, because I am. So if in the plan, we basically had, okay, here's the plan that we came up with that we can afford to do to keep, hopefully, with under our threshold. But here is the plan that we should be doing, right? So it's kind of like two sections, or maybe it's a third section, you know, as well. And here's what it would need to be if we were a regional school, you know, the things that you were saying. But it's a lot of work. So to do that, it's a lot. And who would do that work? But that's what I'm hearing, and I'm thinking that's the education that's really needed in the moment. I think with the AOE and the powers to be, that, you know, this is bullshit.
It's okay, Barb, it's almost 9.
I had a similar,
right?
Like, where's all the stuff?
Huh?
I had a similar, like, where's all the stuff reaction, because as process A and B were laid out, it was really about interacting with the building teams and the building leaders, and not just with the architect, but, you know, really with the survey that we reached out and gathered a lot of feedback from, figuring out the interface between the facility as it stands and the program that they are running or wish they were running, and the ways that a building promotes or detracts from student opportunity, right? Because that's the most important part. And so that developed into the pods at Mary Hogan and teams at MUMS and all of the different sort of regroupings and reorganizations and things like that that are huge price tag items, but didn't make it into this plan because of that. But there's a lot of good work there, and so I think that again, it's like a 5-year plan that's not feasible. It's just a plan on a piece of paper, but just you have to have some way of kind of saying, well, if we actually had the capacity to do things beyond the scope of our current limitations, there are a lot of really important, meaningful changes that we can make to our building.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we can afford, maybe, but it's not what we need.
For feasibility.
Yeah, and I actually think there's like power in making the statement, in saying that. Like, this is, we're in the position where maybe this is what this district could fund, but here's the list of what you're saying, Matt. Like, this is all the other things, and it's not extras. This is what kids in Vermont would need in these schools if you were to decide to start funding that.
Mary Heather.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of a couple of minds. I mean, certainly it does feel frustrating to be on the committee and having gone through the work of sort of careful examination of the programs in a building and how the building does or doesn't meet those needs, and, you know, envisioning what it could be. And that exercise in and of itself, I think, has been helpful for the board to understand program delivery in our schools, and also, you know, where some of our buildings are getting in the way of that program delivery. And I think that's an educational process that is important for board members to understand. So in that regard, I mean, it's been a worthwhile exercise. It is frustrating, however, to emerge from that and, you know, have this, okay, here's all the things that we need, and here's how it could be, and then be like, well, we can put in some security measures, and then maybe revise one wing, and then work on one school. It is very frustrating to understand that, and I agree with Ellen about, you know, it is important for the AOE to know that, you know, this is what we can do with especially if we're working within the spending threshold. This is all we can afford to improve our schools, to deliver the programming that we have determined as a board that our students deserve. And I think that's important information to relay to the AOE. The other thing I wonder, and maybe it's just the cynical part of me, is, what's happening with all this information that's being compiled for, all the school districts in the state. It's going to the AOE, and the AOE now has all this information about what schools need, the decisions that boards are making. And frankly, some of this process has forced us and other districts to have really difficult conversations that up until this point have been avoided. And so there's that cynical part of me that's like, what we're seeing is what the state wanted us to do all along. And we're doing it. And, we're to some degree having to be very creative and come up with solutions, and then we're gonna hit a wall at some point. And the AOE needs to understand that. And I think, I guess I'm wondering, what will come of the data that are being submitted to the AOE, and to what extent does this information inform the larger sort of redistricting questions? I don't know the answer to that, but that's just kind of my.
But if your plan is this, and this is what you submit, it's not going to tell them anything.
See, I think the plan. I mean, maybe I'm incorrect, but sitting in the facilities committee meetings, I was always under the impression that we were giving them everything, including the full district-wide inventory of what we have, the condition they're in, where buildings are falling short in terms of our program delivery, and now looking at what we can afford, our spending capacity, and what we can do with what limited funds we have. Like that to me seemed like the full plan. Maybe I was looking at it in a much broader way, because this is not very helpful to anybody. I don't know.
Steve.
Well, I think Jess was trying to say something.
Okay, Jess.
Yeah, just to echo part of what you said, Mary Heather, I think we've also made really difficult and impactful decisions to combine some of our schools, to move kids out of their towns, and we're still left with, Cornwall has over 90 students, and it's in terrible shape, the building. We've kind of done that work in a way that's been, pressurized externally a little bit. And yeah, I think that's just an important part of the story, is that we've done kind of part of what the state wants places to be doing, is to combine small schools, and it's still leaving us with between a hard place and a hard place, like Steve Cash was saying. And I think, and knowing that if Act 73 moves forward how it's written, I can't think of what more we have to lose, because we might not exist soon. I can't see a downside of giving them all the information, because the downside is not being a district anymore, which is already written into the law, potentially. So yeah, I can't see a downside of more information being shared.
Steve.
I think that there is I'm getting the feeling anyway, that there is some sort of animus towards us, and I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that the legislature is at the point right now where, to quote an old meme, honey badger don't care. They want to cut, and this is their only tool, because when they tried to say, let's make a committee that's going to tell you how to consolidate the districts, universally the feedback went out was, we don't want involuntary consolidation. So the legislature is saying, we keep trying, but nobody will listen to us. And so they're using these really, really blunt tools, like you said, that they've been trying to use for 20 years. When schools are starting to fall apart, they get closed. When people are, what happened in Act 123, for those of you that were around, they said, hey, we've got this little margin here that you're going to be held harmless, and boom, every district in, they tried to fill that in with capital. And tried to get money to fix their schools. And when the legislature saw that, they immediately shut it down. They're trying to starve us of capital, because they're trying to get us to consolidate schools. And if we won't do it any other way, that's the only way they can think of to do it. So I don't think it's directed at us, because I think we're trying to do the right thing. But there's a reality in the state where it's not just us. you know, there are fewer people in Vermont. There's a smaller tax base. It's the parallels between our districts having smaller numbers of students and the state having smaller tax revenues is not imaginary, and they don't see any other way to do this. I think it's one of the few levers they have left to pull, and they're pulling it. So.
Alan, and then Mary.
I mean, just to point out, the 3 Middlebury schools, which I assume under any reconfiguration would remain, Moms, MUHS, and Mary Hogan, our low-end estimates for what those schools needs is $109 million. So I'm totally with Mary Heather, like everything should go to them. We should point out that we're doing the hard work of making these decisions for all kinds of reasons. And if we wanted all of our students to consolidate into Mary Hogan, we would need a lot more than the $20 million that we already have estimated for 50 additional students. And we're already at $110 million practically. Like, it's still, it doesn't, the false narrative of this is all about school consolidation, this is all about rural schools, this is also about chronic neglect of school buildings by the state legislature for the better part of 15 years. And that's what we're facing. So if we wanted to renovate every single school, it would cost, $119 million. But most of that's going towards our Middlebury schools, which I think survive almost any reconfiguration we might talk about. I'll get off the soapbox, but this is insane. I'm so tired.
I think it's I can certainly relate to the context we're in, where everything that you do feels like it has a political ramification, right? You're advancing one discussion over another discussion, and that's part of the exhausting nature of these times, right now. That said, I think we have some needs that are important. And you have some ability to meet some of those needs, and we have some community conversations to have. I'm with the Friends of Cornwall School Group on the 14th, I think. Just beginning to have conversations, right, about the way that their building does impact programming, right, and what does that look like, And I think, having conversations with moms teams about, all right, so where are we with this, overcrowding, and what is that going to look like if we have 20 fewer students or 40 fewer students, or, what is the plan for that, and how can we look or support that? I think we have some things in front of us that are also important to keep our eye on, right? It's so hard to let go of the larger context sometimes, and focus on what we can do. But I think it's an important part of the exercise. It's not just for the AOE. I think this is helpful in helping you understand what is your capacity for capital improvement, what are the needs in the buildings that impact programming or students, at high levels. And what is your best guess about the order in which to investigate and perhaps tackle those? I mean, that's the only thing that's within your control, and so from that standpoint, I think it's a good conversation to have.
Steve.
Yeah, and I think on the political side of it, the other thing we're going to run into is at some point, as we either close or move students from schools in their town, like, when does that start to impact the voting population? And when does that start to show up? And how is that going to impact budgets and things like that, where, we are trying to navigate the realities that we have, and then regardless of the budget, if someone is from a town where their school is closed or their student is going to a different school, they're probably going to have a very different opinion on a budget, regardless of all of the work that has been done.
Well, keep in mind that Act 73 does not have voters voting on budgets,
That's
right?
why.
Which is,
There you go. Even better.
whoops, I think maybe connected.
Yeah.
Barb, I was just gonna, just to also say, I mean, this is it's a huge issue, and it's a huge issue that is also in a parallel way impacting healthcare and
Yes.
we in this state. And their big frustration is the Green Mountain Care Board and the limitations on spending that they have. And you know, it's all related, and it's all related to the fact that we have a state with infrastructure requirements, and there's just not enough people to pay for it. And in Vermont, we have an aging population where it's very expensive to insure them and care for them, and money going out is more than money coming in. And so that relates to our benefits that we offer our staff. It's all connected, right? So it's, you know, I know from the healthcare side of things that they just have to work with what they have. They have to work with the restrictions that the Green Mountain Care Board imposes on them, and we are in a similar circumstance, and we can, you know, advocate all we want and point out things, and I think it's important to do so, but we also, this is our reality. And so I think, like I said, it's important to bring this up to the AOE, and we can say, you know, we can't do this, it's impossible to do it, but it's also our reality. And, you know, we have kids and families relying on us, so we have to carry forward with what we can do.
What sort of public, I mean, Suzanne brought this up in the beginning, right? It seems like to me, there's an opportunity to educate the public, kind of what we're faced with. And I'm wondering at what point would that even make sense? Any thoughts on that? Steve?
I do think going through Truex Cullins's work and getting the current state numbers, I was just flipping through and I came up with roundabout like 62 million for 4 buildings so far. You know, and so like if we could compare kind of that current state potential with our max ability to budget, you know, and know that will only get us so far. Between those two, there will be a certain percentage, whether it's 60%, where we use up all of our bonding capacity, but still can't even get our schools to our current needs. That's the economics. That's the gap right there that exists. And I think if there's a way to demonstrate that to people, I think that could be good, if nothing else, just so people understand. Like on one hand, it's like, oh, you're budgeting right to the threshold. It's like, yeah, we're budgeting right to the threshold and we're meeting 30% of the building needs.
Right, exactly.
So
exactly.
Are we irresponsible for budgeting to the threshold, or are we responsible for budgeting to the threshold?
Because that's all we can do.
That's depends on your viewpoint on it. But I feel like something there might be helpful to educate folks, just to show like this is the percentage that.
Got a cost summary if it would be helpful.
Well, you have the annual meeting, right?
Yeah.
And there's typically we put together a presentation, right, around, the budget or whatnot. And I think that's probably a perfect opportunity, and something the facilities committee could advise, about, look, here's what we're learning, about what our buildings need in their current state and what our capacity is as we're sorting these things out. You don't have to approve a plan by that time, right? It's not, there's no one's coming after you, because it's late or anything of that nature. So I think that can be part of the process, and you could get some public input into that conversation at that time if you wanted. It's just an opportunity that's upcoming.
I think if we did that, we would want to somehow advertise that, you know, we're going to have the regular budget and the information, but we're going to spend some focused time on key learnings. That's, you know, not just all about the current budget that we're wanting you to pass, right? So that people are aware of it, and if they're intrigued, interested, we might get a little more participation at the meeting, or at least have people listening to it afterwards, since it is streamed. Right? All good. Jason, what do you hope for us to do here today?
Given the hour, I think we probably push the discussion as far as we can reasonably expect.
Okay.
I would ask everyone to just sit with the numbers and look at the priorities and just consider if you are aligned with it, and if there are things that are missing or things that you think should be prioritized over other things, you know, send me and or Matt or Dr. Baker that feedback.
And we'll get the Shoreham column
Sorry.
on the right page,
Yeah.
and just send this out, you know, to everybody where you have it complete electronically as
Thank
well.
you.
So
Thank you.
yeah, this was meant to be a working document tonight.
Thank you. Oh,
Can I ask one like summary question?
Yes.
Or whatever? It seems to me there's like a lingering debate about whether or not we send this much or this much to the AOE or whatever. How do we resolve, or I don't know, but is there a time and place for us to decide that?
I think what we'll do administratively is look at the template information, and, you know, we'll take a look at that and maybe run that by the facilities committee.
Yeah.
You know, and as an agenda item for them, so that gets dialed in a little clearer in terms of, you know,
What we could
what's
do.
involved and what's
Okay.
required. And,
Good question.
yeah.
And some of it, it's a really big spectrum, like some of the, I think its proposed state was David's terminology, but that was like, if we did combine and become a regional high school, what would that cost look like?
Yeah.
And that is like,
Yeah, I don't know what the scope of you think is everything, but you know, something that is, I don't know, like I'm not as familiar with this. It seems like there's people who are saying, oh, well, more than bare bones. There's no risk in giving it to them. Let's give it to them. Whatever that more is, I'd just be curious I don't know. It seems like people raise that, so I want to know if we're gonna consider that in the future or whatever.
You would end up approving the plan that we sent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, Ron and then Jess.
I was also gonna, so my eye is drawn here towards the more detailed Cornwall facility analysis and community engagement. And I really wonder what kind of engagement we're hoping for. I mean, we did a lot of thinking together as a board about what points in the pipeline of our ideas and thinking we should be soliciting engagement at. And maybe that's a conversation for our next time, our next run through with this, but I think that should also be kind of front and center for us. And I'm glad that you mentioned, Wendy, the Friends of Cornwall meeting on the 14th. I would like to go to that if they would be. I'll write them and see if they're willing and interested in having board members attend. But
yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things on the plate for engagement, right? I mean, one thing is, I think it's important to remember that to Mary Heather's point, these kinds of conversations have not really been part of the fabric for a number of years, because I think maybe in like 2018 or so, or whenever it was, right, that the district first formed, and then there was discussion about, a facilities master plan and which schools survived and which ones didn't, and that caused a lot of great angst and hard hurt feelings and anger, and so I think in some of our communities, when there's discussion about facilities, that's where the conversation starts, right? Everybody's kind of back there, and so administratively, it's incumbent on us to ensure that schools and communities continue to operate in stable ways, right? So that means that I will go and make sure that staff have clear and factual information, that parent groups who invite me to come have clear and factual information. And that's not politically motivated. There's no discussion about what should or shouldn't happen. There's more, it's just, here's where we are in the process, you know, and also what do you have in mind as far as a way forward that builds understanding, you know, that is different, right, from a previous time when it felt very different. So I think that is that's an administrative action that I think it's important for us to take to make sure that people have correct information and we're operating from, you know, the same sheet of music. That might be a little bit different from a community engagement process that says, what should we do? You know, and that, right, that might be a different protracted piece. So I just wanted to make sure to be clear that my visit and conversations right now are related to ensuring that people have factual and accurate information, and that, you know, we're understanding that we're not making decisions, you know, about what to do or not to do with Cornwall right now. We understand that we've got to get more information and think about this, and what would their perspectives be, and what are good lines of communication around those pieces, so that we have stability in staff and parents and community where we can. So that's the purpose of these initial conversations. Jess.
My question was something similar, but I'm just curious. This is my first time on the board when we're starting kind of these deliberate community engagements in communities. So, like, what factual information are you talking about? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I think trying to think of how best to phrase this. There are assumptions made among many about that relate to old patterns of working, you know, that might relate to initial conversations about facilities, you know, that might have happened many years ago, that kind of come to the surface as, well, this must be what it means right now. For example, that you know, the Truex Collins presentation, you know, about any one school or another is it. There's no other analysis that would ever be done, you know, in order to determine where to go, or really what was a process A or a process B, or what's the purpose of this, or, you know, even just bonding capacity, right? You know, that's not something that's widely known. Like, I mean, it is for people who watch meetings and who read materials, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. So I think sometimes just clarifying some of those pieces and really regurgitating much of the discussion and materials that you've had that are already in the public sphere, but in a way where people can you know, ask questions about them. You know, I think that's the kind of thing that people appreciate. It just brings a different level of stability, so that people are ready to engage around what's going to be important as we move ahead.
Because they don't hear you. They only hear what's back in their head.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I knew it. They were going to get to this, and I've been waiting.
Right.
Yeah. As opposed to having a dialogue.
I mean, I will say,
yes.
I think that may overrepresent kind of people's ability to hear some of it. Some of it can be very hard to hear.
Agreed.
Oh, it is.
And it, you know, sometimes when you are faced with those challenges and those realities, it's just hard to take that as reality. And it's not so much, I think, that people don't want to hear it. It may just be a significant thing for them to understand if their school was going to change or not be there, their students would be elsewhere. So I think we all should just tread lightly in that space, because it's none of it's easy, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's 9:20. So what do you think? are we good at this point to stop the conversation around this, the discussion? And obviously, there's much more discussion to be had. This is just the start.
It's important probably to represent that for the record, that these materials, they don't represent decisions that are made. They
Yes,
represent a way of trying to think about this information to prompt this conversation. I think that's because if you don't have anything, it's hard to talk about everything, right? So the facilities committee, as we move forward, on your agenda, can be sort of a revisiting of what does feel reasonable to begin to advance, based on what you've heard tonight, and what does that look like?
Okay. So I'm going to move us on. Up next is our second public comment period. Is there any public attendees? Doesn't look like there is. So we'll move on to board reflections. Any reflections this evening that anyone wants to share? It's late, I understand, but if you have some reflections, that's fine.
Just like thank you to the policy and the finance committee. It seems like they put in a lot of work. Appreciate
Yes, they
it.
do. Yes. Thank you, Ron. So at this time, are we ready for an adjournment motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. A second? Thank you, Jess. And everyone drive careful tonight and be out there on the road.
Yeah.
I hope I make it up my hill.